Hi, welcome to Culturally Determined on Blogging Heads. I'm your host, Aryeh Cohen-Wade, and my guest today is someone who probably does not need an introduction for anyone who is consuming this content in whatever form, but I'll ask him to introduce himself anyway, and that is Matt Lewis.
Hey, I'm Matt Lewis, senior columnist at the Daily Beast and co-host of the DMZ show here at bloggingheads.tv.
Thanks so much for coming on. And yes, I'll get this sort of a crossover episode, like when, Batman shows up in Superman or, Scooby-Doo.
When Magnum, wasn't there like a Magnum PI, maybe the Murder, She Wrote lady, and I can't even remember. There was some of these shows from like the 80s. If Bill Scher was here.
Yeah, you got your era of TV that you guys talk about is a bit before my time, but maybe Murder, She Wrote with Magnum PI, because we're sort of going to be talking about a big problem, and we're bringing in various detectives from various sides to talk about it. So thanks for coming on. And so what inspired this conversation was the DMZ episode that you did with Bill Scher from a couple weeks ago, and I guess you guys were talking. The topic was sort of Kamala Harris and her various political issues, and then it moved to, if once Biden leaves the scene, is there anyone on the Democratic side who has sort of the stature or gravitas or charisma or political ability to win this thing? And then you were saying, well, it kind of seems like they don't, but maybe there's no one on the Republican side either who could do this, and sort of we're stuck with this group of kind of losers on all sides. And then you were talking about how you feel like the country is in a crisis, and we need some sort of great leader to emerge. And in past crises in American history, that has happened, and maybe that isn't going to happen this time, or could it, or what? I thought this was really interesting, and especially the aspect that you guys talked about, sort of the policy aspect versus the sort of moral or spiritual aspect. And so you also discussed Jimmy Carter and how he had this, he had an advisor who wanted him to sort of lead a moral reawakening or something in the country. And then he had other advisors who were like, no, you just need, people are upset about gas prices. Like, you just need to focus on that, the pocketbook issues. And of course he, would I guess he sort of chose somewhere in the middle and then lost re-election. And yeah, so what is the country needing right now? Does it need just a solution to the obvious problems, which would be mainly the coronavirus and the economy, or does it need something more, some sort of, new, like, spiritual, moral, some ethical awakening or something? Because we've had so many dark times. Okay, so I talked a little bit too much. Well, what do you think?
I guess the only thing I would say is I think clearly we need more than just our material needs met, because even before COVID and inflation or all the problems plaguing us now, there was an emptiness and a sense that things were not going well. We were very prosperous materially. We live at a time where people are, kind of healthier, and just statistically speaking, there's no better time to be alive and no better place to be alive than right here, right now. And yet, very obviously, we are not happy. We're not procreating as one sign of that. And I think that is a sign of something deeper than just not having children. But in 2016, when we elected Donald Trump, COVID didn't exist, and inflation wasn't a problem, violent crime wasn't really a problem, and yet we were obviously suffering from this kind of psychic malaise. And so I would definitely argue that there is something deeper than the obvious problems in front of us right now.
Yeah, and I think I may have said this before on the show, but the fact that, like, the United States produced a figure like Donald Trump is sort of an indictment of some core aspects of the country, and that's not and let alone the fact that he was elected president. Like just the fact that this horrible person existed, in my opinion, was sort of enough to damn us eternally. But then that he was lawfully elected to lead the country is even worse. And yeah, and it seemed just recovering from the problems that either Trump caused or Trump exacerbated or Trump didn't solve would be a Herculean effort. But yeah, but that in 2016, looking back, things seem not quite so bad from 2021 perspective, and yet half the country, roughly slightly less than half, was ready to pick Trump, and so that's a sign that something has gone seriously off the rails, I think. And then sort of people like Joe Biden or Kamala Harris, are they capable of stepping up? And I mean, one way I thought about this during the election was Biden was promising a return to normalcy, and I think Bill actually, this is something Bill talked about, of just like, okay, the craziness, we've had enough of the craziness. Let's return. Let's put the adults back, and people who know what they're doing will be running Washington. And I think that's and politics will recede from the center of like national culture because the domination of politics in our lives is not natural, and most people don't like it and don't want to be thinking about the president all the time. And so just a more boring kind of government, I thought, was sort of the underlying premise of Biden's candidacy, and also would be fairly successful. So, has that worked out? I guess, the Delta variant maybe upended that. But at this point, it doesn't seem like just boring competence or semi-competence is going to be enough, because people are obviously still mad out there about various things. And I don't know. And even if the pandemic receded, it seems like people will just find something else to be mad about, like critical race theory or something real, quasi-real, or imagined. Will rile people up, and they will be happy. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I just think there's so many variables here, including like social media, which gives people the opportunity to, for one thing, like to compare ourselves to other people, right? Maybe that's on Instagram, and we see how well someone else is doing, and that creates like bitterness or envy, which is not healthy for the culture of a country. People who want to get, who want to instigate fights or rile people up can use social media. So there are tools and sort of technological shifts that have made it maybe harder for a country to stay together. But if you watch, like, say, like football, like the NFL, their winning teams tend to have this culture, and there are leaders who emerge, and like they get lucky, like things go well. Sometimes it is luck. The ball bounces their way, so to speak. And sometimes there's like a player that needs to be removed. There may be someone on the bench or someone in the clubhouse who's a problem, and there needs to be the head coach or the quarterback who kind of steps in and puts that person in line. And I'm a believer in that. I think that, like, NFL franchises, for example, that establishing the right culture is an important, like, ingredient to their success. And in a country like America, obviously we don't have the mechanisms, nor should we, to instill that kind of discipline. But I do think if I were, if you hired me to kind of come in and fix the country or whatever, I wouldn't just be thinking like, well, we need to spur GDP growth. And I would be thinking like, first thing we need to do is address the culture problem here. There's a culture problem. Easier said than done, but I really think that that's kind of the fundamental problem.
Right. And that's an interesting metaphor of, a sports team, because that assumes that we're all on the same team. Whereas
Yeah.
many Americans would probably think there's at least two teams and we need to annihilate the other team, or maybe there's a couple dozen teams and my team, I want my team to beat all the other teams. Um, and, and so I think, so one thing that could have happened when the coronavirus emerged and, the world locked down is that there could have been like a surge of national unity or even global unity with this idea that this is a common threat that threatens every person on earth, and so we need to band together to fight against it. And so that didn't happen. So obviously global unity didn't happen, but also like national unity strangely didn't happen either. Maybe it happened in some countries, but it didn't happen here, even though we could, probably all Americans could agree that we don't want our fellow Americans to die horrible deaths from this terrible disease. Yeah. And yet so this is probably partially Trump's fault because he is, he's a divider, not a uniter. But it wasn't like, it wasn't like after 9/11 when suddenly everyone seemed to be united, and maybe that's a good thing because some of the things we did after 9/11 turned out were not so great. But the unification that the unification that happened after 9/11 or Pearl Harbor or something didn't happen, even though it seems like this is kind of an equivalent or even greater threat. Certainly, 250 times as many people have been killed in America versus 9/11. But there was no leader to unite us, and also it seemed like, I don't know, like people tribalized and factionalized around the lockdown rules, masking, now vaccination, and all these other fights. And the external threat didn't unify us in the way that Pearl Harbor did. Do you have thoughts on why that happened?
Yeah, I feel like, it would be awesome if there was some sort of a religious revival or awakening that happened in America at the grassroots level that really changed hearts. But that, we can't plan for that. You can't really make that happen, and that's a heavy lift. It would be much easier to kind of go with the great man theory of politics, and so, we don't know what would have happened if someone other than Donald Trump had been president, but it's hard to imagine anybody who would have handled coronavirus worse than Donald Trump from the spiritual, and by spiritual here, I'm using it kind of colloquially, right? Mm-hmm. From that standpoint. Okay. So you could argue that Donald Trump did a fine job with Operation Warp Speed, but in terms of being the moral leader of a country, of summoning us and uniting us or whatever, you can't imagine anyone worse who would have done a worse job than he did, right? Mm-hmm. And so what if, I'm a conservative guy, so what if Marco Rubio had won in 2016? What would he have been like? What would Tim Scott, President Tim Scott, what might he have done in this opportunity? And it's impossible to know what would have happened, but I suspect it would have been a lot better. And so, now we have a chicken or egg problem. What does it say about a country that would elect Donald Trump? That's an indictment, I think, on the American public, all of us. But would we have behaved better if we had someone in a leadership position who was more responsible and really inspiring us? I do believe in leadership. I do believe it matters if there is someone who has not only the rhetorical ability to inspire, which Trump doesn't have, but also the moral authority to do it. Trump was the worst possible person. And so I think that maybe the easiest, and this is still a really heavy lift, but the easiest thing to do is maybe try to get someone elected as president who is kind of decent and honorable and eloquent. And that's where, this conversation started, because not only are the top, sort of two most likely people to be our next president, which I think would be Joe Biden and Donald Trump, not only are they both not up to the job to the degree they should be, but I don't really see a lot of, hope on the bench either.
Yeah, so I agree with you that Trump was basically the worst person who could have been in charge of the country during this crisis. And I think I tweeted very early on, like late March 2020, like if Trump was not a total narcissist, he would just resign, say, I can't handle this. I'm handing off to Mike Pence. God bless and good luck. Of course, he didn't do that, but basically any other person, probably just picking someone out of the phone book would have been better. But Mike Pence, not someone whose politics I agree with or a character I particularly admire, but just a standard politician who does regular politician things, would have been much better. And I assume, Mike Pence would have encouraged masking and vaccination and sort of nipped that in the bud in some ways and sort of modeled good behavior for his his half of the country, and that would have led to possibly hundreds of thousands of fewer Americans dead. And yeah, so we really we really screwed up when we elected Donald Trump as president. That was a giant mistake. And now, yes, as said before, we have to both dig ourselves out from the problems of the past, of the 2016 to 2020 era, but also confront the problems that led to Trump's rise and victory and to begin with. And that seems very, very difficult for anyone, let alone Joe Biden.
And earlier I said, what would I do if you made me if you gave me carte blanche authority to come in and try to fix America? I think that when we think about who should be president, and when whoever the next president is, they should approach the job that way. Now there's going to be competing interests. There's going to be, just like Pat Cadell was telling Jimmy Carter, there's a spiritual crisis that's really deep and profound. And Walter Mondale was saying, well, wait a second here, let's worry about gas prices. There's going to be competing interests. And as I told Bill, I think Carter should have acted as if there was a spiritual crisis without saying there was, in a way, Reagan addressed the spiritual crisis by never acknowledging it, but by it was almost, and this will go to kind of the Norman Vincent Peale power of positive thinking thing that Donald Trump also has, but he kind of transcended it and just bestowed upon the American people this belief that they were winners and that there'll always be a brighter day. This very optimistic message that kind of lifted them. It's very complicated, of course. I'm simplifying here, but I guess my point is that, not only is it important kind of for the leader to acknowledge that his real goal is not just our material needs, but to inspire and uplift and kind of restore us to being on the same team. But he also can't really talk about doing it. You have to show it, not tell it.
Yeah, because, like a Sunday school sermon kind of thing is not going to fly, maybe ever, but certainly not in 2021, given all the cultural and technological changes. And okay, so if we're thinking what sort of person could be a good leader this time, well, I'm somewhat biased, but one person who comes to mind is Barack Obama. A sort of person with a sunny, optimistic. I was talking about 2008 Obama, at least. His slogan was hope. And the way he crafted his narrative, he was sort of the American promise fulfilled. In no other country is my story even possible, is a line that he used. And a generational signified racial change, generational change, and yet we wouldn't say the to Obama terms were a time of national unity and spiritual and moral uplift. Like it seemed like he could have been the sort of person who led some sort of paradigm shift or something. And
I put some of the blame on him for that, to be honest with you. And so I agree with like everything you've said. And in the sense that I think he was very well positioned to be that person. And I think he was incredibly talented. But I'll just go back to the football analogy, which is sometimes we draft quarterbacks and they look really promising. And sometimes they even win the Super Bowl, like Russell Wilson, won like pretty early on. And then I'm just bringing him up because he lost to the Washington football team last night. And I actually, interestingly, I interviewed Russell Wilson's, for lack of a better term, spiritual coach, motivator, a while back, who has a book out. I think it's called "It Takes What It Takes." But anyway, so I think that Obama simply, he wasn't Reagan, he wasn't Lincoln, he wasn't FDR. I think he was incredibly talented. And I also think, you could talk about racism and other obstacles that were confronting him. But all great leaders, just like all great football teams, they're playing against professionals too. The people on the other side they're getting paid to stop you from scoring touchdowns. FDR had obstacles. Reagan had obstacles, and yet they delivered. I think they got the job done. I think Obama, he's a two-term president. He has, much to recommend him. I don't think he was able to change the culture and to bring us together. And I think some of that is a result of his failing, that he did not live up to the hype and the promise of hope and change that he campaigned on initially.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone would argue that he united the country. That would be insane.
Right, and I'll go back to Bill Parcells, who was it Parcells who said, you are what the scoreboard says you are, or what your record says you are, right? And so Obama either did it or he didn't, and he did, so he didn't.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like he had a failed presidency. Obviously, he was reelected, had major points on the board for the sports metaphor with, the Affordable Care Act, etc. But it wasn't a revolutionary, turning point. Not revolutionary, but it wasn't, a turning point in American history that reshuffled the, the landscape in the way that Lincoln, FDR, Reagan did. And so okay, so personal failings, just didn't have the stuff. That would be one explanation. Maybe the timing was wrong. He entered office at the, sort of very bottom of the crisis and the economic crisis, and then and didn't really understand that how bad the economic crisis was at the time. Maybe that was part of it. And so, sort of, he entered at 1929 instead of 1933, essentially.
Yeah.
And so couldn't be that sort of FDR type figure. Obviously, the challenges are different when we're talking, especially talking about FDR and Lincoln. There's not a threat that the country is going to be dissolved.
I would also say, and I agree with you. I think luck and timing are a lot of everybody. It is what it is. The atmospherics, the environment, like luck. That's totally true, and it's uncontrollable. I do think that Obama, if you remember, he comes into office, and I think he thought, let's go back to the putting points on the scoreboard analogy. I need to do something big, right? And it was healthcare. And I'm old enough to remember the big fight over Hillary care and how divisive that was, and the talk about socialized medicine and all that. And so, look, we could argue that the trade-off was worth it, that Obama needed to do something for healthcare, and he made a sacrifice. And but I guess my point would be that was a choice. The choice was not, I am going to transcend politics and restore America's, kind of spiritual or cultural problem. It was, I can do one big thing probably. It's gonna be pushing through on a partisan. They pushed this through in a very partisan manner, Obamacare. Then after the public was so pushing the brakes to elect Scott Brown, a Republican to replace Ted Kennedy. He doesn't listen to him. He plows through. He didn't seem to take cues. Midterms go against him. Instead of kind of readjusting like Bill Clinton did and reinventing himself, he keeps pushing kind of his agenda. Look, there are plenty of smart political strategists who would tell you he did the right thing. Republicans are never going to cooperate. They're always going to be dragging their feet. This is an important thing. It's landmark legislation. You did something that Harry Truman wanted to do. You got to do it, right? That's fine, but that's a choice. And when you choose to do that, that means you're choosing not to focus on being the uniter, right? And so that would be my ding on, he made a choice. And I would argue healthcare is very important, but our fundamental need as a people is this spiritual problem.
I think, okay, so part of that, there's truth to that. And you could say, was it, worth it or not to expand health insurance to X number of people at the cost of, both the political cost of losing the Congress and, and also the, making everyone mad instead of uniting everyone. At the same time, you can't unite people if they don't actually want to be united. And, the Republicans were pretty opposed to him from the get-go. And it's possible that, some olive branch or something could have changed things. But at the same time, it is a, zero-sum two-party system where one, if you want to win, the other side has to lose. And so Mitch McConnell made the correct strategic bet that opposing Obama would be his path to power, not working with Obama. So you can't be a uniter if the other side refuses to unite. So that's part of it. But also, in the FDR example, the external threat caused by Imperial Japan and Nazi Germany is what really unified the country. And there wasn't that sort of thing during Obama's term. Now, the coronavirus was sort of a similar threat, except it was, like I said before, a threat to every person on Earth. And that seemed to not unite the country in the way that, okay, so in my alternate reality, Trump resigns, Pence becomes president. He appoints as vice president, some like elder statesman from the Democratic side, and says, okay, this is the biggest threat since 1945. We're running a unity government to confront this giant threat and save the lives of hundreds of thousands of Americans. It's possible to, that could have maybe happened. I don't think that's totally crazy to think about that. Obviously, it didn't for various reasons. And even if it wasn't Trump, it would be hard if it was Ted Cruz or Marco Rubio. It would have been hard to imagine, saying, okay, this is now a unity government and essentially like a war footing of the entire country being drafted into this effort to stamp out the virus and save lives. And that didn't happen here, and it probably didn't happen in most countries, except like some of the East Asian countries. Like I saw the stat that South Korea has had 3,500 COVID deaths in a population of about 50 million. So that's like at least 100 times better, a lower rate than America. And so, the different culture, different politics over there. But instead, they went in the total opposite of tribalism, factionalism, blaming, weird conspiracy theories, blaming other people, blaming other countries, blaming international organizations, blaming, wealthy people, blaming the Jews, blaming any group you wanted to blame for our problems, and led to, even worse factionalism and civil unrest, literally, and people storming the Capitol at the end. So it was a real disaster all around.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess another question that your talk with Bill made me think of is like, is this even possible? Can you have, even if we had the perfect leader, waiting in the wings in 2021, could this happen, or is it just the circumstances, the technology, and the history are such that you can't unite the country? It's just it can't happen no matter what the skills are of or moral character or whatever of any individual leader. It's just impossible.
No, I don't. I reject that. I think that like we live in a fallen world, and the American system is like by necessity adversarial, and actually I talk about unity, but we don't really want true unity, right? True unity would be like one political party. I want them competing against each other in an adversarial system, and I want there to be checks and balances and all that's healthy. And look, I also don't want to be too naive about the past. You mentioned FDR was able, we had this existential threat, and that helped FDR. I think Reagan also, with the Cold War, that's also an important factor to consider about his ability to kind of marshal people behind him. And even there, I mean, I remember Reagan, I was a kid, but Reagan would get up and give a State of the Union that I thought was awesome. And then Tip O'Neill or somebody would come in and say, like, I mean, maybe it was Mario Cuomo, would give a speech about it's really a tale of two cities. There's Reagan City, which is where the rich people live, but all the, he doesn't care about the poor people. That's just politics, right? I mean, there was the Iran Contra affair, and they hear it was messy.
Yeah,
and so I guess my point is like, even the moments that I'm sort of holding up as times, but I do think that
even I assume like the 1984 election, like Reagan only quote unquote won like 59% or something, so there was still 40% of the country that wasn't on board with them, and so there's a true landslide election in America seems almost impossible, given.
Yeah, I mean, he won the Electoral College 49 states, but
right.
Some of those states he won by a point or two. You know what I mean? So yeah, a lot of people in America did not like him, and that's great. And so it wasn't like quote unquote unity in that sense, but I think America had a little bit of a swagger at that point. Like there was a sense that we were competent, that we could get things done, that we, were to some degree in control of our own destiny. There was a lot more trust, I would think, in institutions. I mean, I'm sure that Pew has data that would buttress this. More trust in elites and institutions. And I think we can get back to that sort of thing if our elites and institutions did a better job of actually kind of earning our trust and respect.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe Daniel Bessner, who's appeared on this show and on Glenn Lowry's show a couple times, said something like, for someone roughly my age, I'm 38, our entire adulthood has been elite failure after elite failure, from the failure to prevent 9/11 to the failure of Iraq to the economic disaster, et cetera, leading up to Trump and COVID. And so the people who are like, throw the bums out, the elites are morons, fuck them, they have a point. Like the elites have screwed up repeatedly, and maybe they don't deserve to be elites to begin with, but then who else? And that sort of attitude is, I guess, what leads to an outsider real estate billionaire like Donald Trump, gaining power.
Yeah. Well, and to me, the difference is, like, are these honest mistakes, or are these the result of people who are lying to us? And that to me, that's the big dividing line, because I can accept we see through a glass darkly, but the problem is the sense that we are being lied to by some of these folks.
Um, so you know, I was reminded thinking about this of something that Marianne Williamson, if you remember that, remember
Yes.
her, that she said,
Yeah.
and of course she is kind of a strange person and maybe a kook or a quasi kook, but she said during a 2019 debate, I have the quote. So this is a Democratic debate. If you think any of this wonkiness is going to deal with this dark psychic force of the collectivized hatred that this president is bringing up in this country, then I'm afraid that the Democrats are going to see some very dark days. Um, and that had some truth to me, even though people made
Yeah.
fun of it and turned into a GIF where she's like glowing rays are emanating from her or something. Like there was some sort of dark, for lack of a better term, energy like behind Trump's rise, and I guess it boiled over on January 6th at the Capitol. And what and so Williamson had this like politics of love or something, which was seems airy fairy, and who knows exactly what it means in in practical terms. But the idea that there is some sort of psychic, spiritual, or moral crisis that fueled Trump's rise, and that the country needs to confront in some way, rings true to me, even as someone who's like a not religious person and a materialist and so forth. And then it seemed possible that Sleepy Joe Biden, Grandpa Joe, the kindly old man who has suffered a lot of personal tragedy in his life, was suited to the moment of this time of like national mourning and trauma. And it hasn't exactly played out that way for various reasons. But how how can, I guess, the president can give speeches and sort of talks and lectures and model good behavior, but I don't know how, like, I don't know. It's like, how can, absent some external force that unifies people, and obviously COVID was not that external force because it divided people further. How, do you have any ideas on how any of this could actually happen? How, people, I don't think people are going to start, flocking to the churches anytime soon. I don't know. There's been this huge shock to the system. Life is going to change in various ways, like practically, like people staying at home more, going into the office less, or traveling less, or something. And people's perspectives have been changed about the importance of work versus family life and stuff like that. So those are kind of psychic shifts that are happening, but I don't know. I can't see, I can't see any,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well,
I'm pessimistic about the future.
yeah. So I have a bunch of things to say. None of them nail it, but but I'll try. So first, I do literally believe in a spiritual realm. But that's not mostly what when I'm using it in this sense. I'm not generally using it like literally. Although I do think it is possible for some like a literal spiritual renewal or some sort of a revival that could sweep the country. But mostly when I'm using the term, as I think most people could tell from the context, I'm talking about like so it's not a material thing, but it's a matter of like attitude and culture. That's generally how I'm using it. I think Marianne Williamson was pretty much right, but just like with Jimmy Carter, it's best to believe it, but not really vocalize it, I think. So I think that is an important lesson to learn. We are not electing a new age healer or a pastor. We are electing a president. And although I think that their top priority should be to tackle what I believe to be, look, you gotta pay attention to China. There's things you got to do, right? There's blocking and tackling you got to do. But I think that really this I'm calling it a spiritual issue, is kind of the foundational, fundamental problem that plagues us today that has to be addressed. I'm maybe a little more optimistic than you. but I don't have a good reason to be. My reason is kind of based on faith, and that faith being that we kind of muddle through and things shake out. And I think that it is possible that America just kind of gets through this rocky time, and, maybe Tim Scott just becomes president. Apparently he's down meeting with Trump at Mar-a-Lago. It could happen.
Well, I mean, that alone is not a good sign from my perspective, that he's going to kiss the ring of the Godfather there.
Yeah.
So,
well, that is a that's a big problem that we have with anybody on the right, because even someone you mentioned, Mike Pence, right, who I think would have been a much better leader during COVID. But obviously he's someone who would have only been in that position by virtue of having sucked up to Trump to get there, right?
Right.
So it's kind of a catch-22, at least on the right. And I don't see a lot of hope on the left right now. But you know what? I mean, like Obama, you might not have thought of Barack Hussein Obama to be the president in like 2003. You know what I mean? So we don't know what the future holds. And actually that leads into the point that I'm making here, which is that it's kind of it's a faith based on nothing, except that America, we can sometimes muddle through, and that when we need that person most, they can rise to the occasion. And just because we don't see them on the horizon does not mean that it's not going to happen. And I would also say that the American public, are very fickle. And the same darn people who right now are clamoring, for Trump, and they're fighting each other in the QAnon, in 10 years, some of those same people will probably be like pushing for compassionate conservatism. And the reason I know is they were doing it 10 years ago. So this is not me praising the American public, because I think it's totally inconsistent and irrational and erratic. But I don't think that where they are today is necessarily, A, I don't think they're going to stay there. And B, I don't even know that it's going to get worse. I think it's totally possible that they oscillate back and forth, and that the pendulum swings.
Yeah. And certainly, there's some group of people who are sort of like, maybe somewhat interested in QAnon, and then after January 6th, they decided just to return to their normal lives and get on with things, and probably haven't thought about it that much anymore. I think the average American doesn't think about politics all that much, and that's probably a good thing. They have stuff to do, and they need to, pick up their kids for after school activities and stuff like that, at least during non-COVID times. Yeah, and the pain, at least since I've thought about this since at least since 2006. Almost every election has been just a reaction against the last one, with the possible exception of 2012. It's just gone back and forth. There's a sort of weird stalemate of throw the bums out, new people come in. Turns out we hate them. Try them again. It's a two-party system. We're stuck with these these groups of losers, and so it goes back and forth. And so Biden, the Democrats losing 2022 would be expected. Biden being able to win by running against whatever crazy thing the Republicans try to do in 2023, that would make sense also. There is a sort of stalemate, and this sort of gets to the Ross Douthat decadence argument. And the people who were big George W. Bush fans in 2005 ended up becoming big Tea Party fans, ended up becoming big Donald Trump fans / QAnon JFK Jr. fans, and whatever serves up to them next, they'll probably happily eat it up.
Yeah,
too, more or less.
Yeah. By the way, so I don't know where this fits in, but here's another point I wanted to make while we're talking, because I've put a lot of pressure on the president, and I think rightfully so. But I also mentioned elites, and there's a lot of elites, and I think like one of the the fact that so many people in the Republican Party embrace Trump is a bad sign. But I also think in some ways it was a warning sign that that the Republican Party and conservatism were not kind of meeting the needs, you know. It was like a canary in a coal mine sort of situation. And so, and like you'll probably notice, like the modern day kind of the new right is like much more populist, and in some cases they sound even like, I don't know, socialist or something. Like, you know, we have to go against big business and all this. Use the power of the state to go after big business and things like that. I'm against that. However, you know, it's the part of the responsibility for all of us who want to keep this experiment going is to like address this culture problem. And I'm going to give you just like one. This will be consistent with my football theme throughout this show, but people are going to think I'm obsessed with football, which I'm actually not. But it makes for a good metaphor. Like when I was a kid, we had you know, baseball parks and stadiums, and they had names. They had names like Candlestick Park. Right now, there's a place called Crypto.com Stadium. Are you aware of this?
Yes, I did hear that. Is it a baseball stadium or something? Is there something called Crypto.com pays like $700 million for the naming rights of something or other?
It's in LA.
Some California stadium or something. Yeah.
And like, this is a small thing, but you know, we've gone from like, you know, we've still got, you know, Boston still has Fenway Park and the Orioles still have Camden Yards, but we're getting more and more like AT&T Stadium, you know, FedEx Field or whatever. Look, I'm a capitalist. I'm a free market guy, but that is destroying our spirit. That is like that's like strangling our spirit. And I think one of the things you're hearing from these people on the new right who want to use the power of the state to tell, you know, companies what to do. I think that this is like a kind of a symbolic thing that these corporations, they're now global. They don't have a special allegiance to the United States or a certain patriotism to this country. And I believe in like the power of beauty and aesthetics and feeding the spirit and nurturing the soul. If you live in a beautiful area, that nurtures your soul. And if you live in a sterile sprawl area, I think that impacts your soul. I really do. And so I think that although there's so much toxicity on the right and so many things that I don't agree with them on, like I remember, I think it was, you know, my old boss, Tucker Carlson, was in Hungary and he got up and they were expecting him to like talk about Viktor Orban or something. And he got up and he gave this speech about beauty and aesthetics. And like, we can differ, you know, there's plenty of beautiful places still in America, you know, and I'm sure there's some crappy places over there. But there is a sense that there are things that feed the human spirit, and that like capitalism and modernity, our business, I'll wrap this up, but our business leaders, our elites, including the people who profit off, you know, making money off of all of us, have a responsibility too. And I think that they have neglected that responsibility.
Yeah, that's interesting. And there's, capitalism is not conservative. Capitalism is dynamic and changes things, and creative destruction, etc. And there's some classic work called like the cultural contradictions of capitalism or something.
Daniel Bell.
Yeah. And I mean, if you there's this whole, I don't know how much you see this stuff online, like this whole sort of trad lifestyle thing of like, imagining and sort of like dressing up like you're living on a farm in like, 1923
Dude, I live in West
something.
Virginia and I haven't had a haircut in 2 years.
Okay, so maybe you're on the edge, but you're not like wearing like buckskin or something like that. I don't know exactly. It's more like, it seems like the women more wear like prairie dresses and stuff like that and have like long braided hair. But there's this idea of like getting back to the land, some sort of, getting away from both the civilization, but also, yeah, all the, shitty things about American capitalism. That, so there's, that is across left or right. It's interesting to think like, someone like Jeff Bezos 30 years ago, like what the rough equivalent of Jeff Bezos would have been like a hero of like the capitalist right is like, oh, this guy created this great company. It does all this great stuff for us, employs, 500,000 people, blah, blah. Actually, everyone left or right hates Jeff Bezos for their own individual reason. So that's definitely different.
And yet I order his stuff every day.
Yeah, it's hard to,
they deliver it to my door and it's cheap.
Yeah, it's hard to, it's hard to escape, but yeah, you can't escape capitalism, really. Okay, well, yeah, so that is a change. I mean, it's weird because a business leader or a phony business leader became the leader of the GOP, but he was certainly sort of not liked by corporate America. There's one thing that's sort of a side point to this that I did want to ask you about, and I've mentioned this on the show before, that weird aspect of the Trump years was that usually the GOP is like the party of morals and values and traditional values. Donald Trump is a very poor fit for that, being like a totally immoral or amoral person. It seems like more like amoral, like morality is it doesn't even play a role in his decision making whatsoever. And so a lot of the right had to sort of fit itself into that, and it was an odd fit. And as I see it, like sort of moralism moved to the left during the past 5 years much more strongly, and a lot of the things we talk about with like wokeism or cancel culture was sort of a moral energy on the left of punishing people who had transgressed in some way, instead of a sort of like, well, you do your thing, I'll do mine, live and let live perspective that, maybe the hippies or something would have embodied more on the left. So Trump is fading, hopefully forever, but it seems like moralism has sort of returned to the right in various ways, which is, in America, it's more traditional home, I think. And you said one example of this would be the silly "Let's go Brandon" thing. And so if you're not, I don't know, this has spread so quickly, maybe everyone knows about it, but as far as I understand, there were some people at like a sporting event who the crowd was chanting "fuck Joe Biden," and then like the announcer, either purposely or because he didn't want to say "fuck" on air, said, "Oh, they're chanting 'Let's go Brandon.'" They're not chanting, and because he didn't want to either insult Biden or say a curse word.
So it was a race. It was like a car race, and it was a female interviewer, as I recall. And it's not clear to me whether she lied and said they're saying "Let's go Brandon," or whether she thought, because sometimes we hear what we want to hear. It wasn't entirely clear to me, but it's laughable. Like when, it is really laughable because like either she is like making that up on the fly, or she totally misheard. And it's so that's works on multiple levels. Yeah.
Right. So as I see it, so then "Let's go Brandon" is now like a rallying cry, and you see it online, and people are like waving banners and putting stickers and say "Let's go Brandon." But what's interesting to me is like, Donald Trump did not have a problem with cursing. Donald Trump would have said "fuck Joe Biden," and everyone would, and if he was at a rally, everyone would have cheered. But now it's sort of like Trump is gone. Oh, actually, conservatives, we're not big on cursing. Like, we like polite language, and cursing is a sin, etc. So we're going to adopt this phrase "Let's go Brandon," which is a coded way to say "fuck Joe Biden," but we're not actually cursing because cursing is bad.
That's an interesting interpretation, and there may be something to it, right? Because like, people who might not feel comfortable cursing can say it. They could wear it on a t-shirt or what. Kids could, but I don't think that's the primary reason. That I think that it caught on because it's funny. If you watch the clip, it's funny that she misinterpreted it. And if you believe that she did so on purpose, there's this other sort of subtext, which is like all the people in the crowd hate Biden, but the woman on TV holding the microphone is pretending they don't. And so it's a commentary on the media,
Right.
on how disconnected they are and how outnumbered they are by the average Joe in the stands. I think it caught on partly because there's a comedic, fun, sort of naughty quality to it. But you're right, naughty but not profane.
Yeah, it's not milquetoast. It's edgy. It's sort of edgy, but also it's not. It's not even saying like I don't know. It's not even saying screw Joe Biden. It's saying let's go Brandon. And if you have no idea what it's about, it seems it's opaque. Also, so it's sort of like a secret code word, which people people like sort of secret handshake kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I have to say, this is something I've delved into slightly with my writing, which is you mentioned edgy. There's something about this that is, and look, it's childish on one hand, but it is fun and funny and irreverent. And that used to be the exclusive domain of the left. They used to be the people who were funny. They used to be the people who mocked and had, like we had like, don't amanatize the eschaton or whatever, like, like this is a much better, in a way, slogan. Like it's not as highfalutin, right? Like I think I can't even pronounce it probably, but that means like don't bring about the end of the world, like don't sort of like that's a very like high level philosophical thing to say, but like this is maybe this is the 2.0 version of that.
Yeah, and Trump was a comedic, entertaining figure in many ways, and his rallies were sort of a like extended stand-up comedy performance with laugh lines, and it was like playing the greatest hits of Lock Her Up and Build the Wall and so forth, and so he has definitely brought a sort of more lowbrow, like Borscht Belt's insult comic kind of thing into, like back into at least part of the culture. And it seems like there are other people who are sort of trying to do his shtick. It doesn't work. He had his own thing and his own like bizarre charisma, and then someone else trying to be like, Trump Jr., not literally Trump Jr., but like doing his kind of insult thing. It just it doesn't quite work.
Think about any stand-up comedian, like, though. I mean, it wouldn't, if you tried to be Rodney Dangerfield, if you tried to be Sam Kinison, if you tried to, like, it's anybody at that level, if you tried to imitate them, it wouldn't work, you can learn lessons from them, maybe, that you could apply to yourself. But any attempt to try to like replicate what they do, I think is gonna just look really lame.
Yeah. So if I had to bet which path the GOP were supposed to sort of take between someone like Matt Gaetz, who is sort of a like mini Trump type figure, who has all sorts of exploits, possibly illegal ones, and I don't know, more of like a choir boy kind of Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, I would think more towards the choir boy kind of part of it, rather than the poke them in the eye, offend everyone kind of.
Well, the other thing too is there are moments in history when styles change, and even in politics, where like up until the first 6 founding fathers or whatever, the first 6 presidents were all connected to the founders, you know what I mean? And they were all kind of like elites. And then you have Andrew Jackson, and then like Jackson kicks off a new era. And so it is possible that Trump kind of kicks off a new era. But even when that happens, it seems like every president is the reaction to the last president and almost like the opposite of.
Mm-hmm.
And so there will be, even if Trump like was a paradigm shifting president, there's gonna be, modifications and you wouldn't want to be just like him, because that's the old. At some point, that's going to be like, yeah, he was president 8 years ago, hopefully. Um, so, this is something George Will talks about, and you wouldn't think of George Will just, because of his age, you might not think of him as being the guy who would have this observation, but I think he has a point. At first, I thought it was kind of naive, but he talked about, like, our saving grace may be that Americans have really short attention spans and get bored. And like, I think there's something to that.
Yeah. And I think definitely before, I think Biden or whoever would have won absent the coronavirus, because people were just sort of tired of Trump's nonsense. And it was like the show had gone on too long and it had gotten stale and old. And we tried having this wacko person president, didn't work out so well. Let's go back to the boring guy. And certainly Biden is Trump's opposite in a lot of ways in terms of like experience, being such an institutionalist and being sort of boring versus Trump's, never know what he's going to say next craziness. And it'll be interesting to see, if Trump doesn't run again, and if Trump runs again, then I guess we're sort of stuck in this same dynamic. But if he doesn't, and then what are the stylistic differences that some other new challengers might try to present to Biden? Like youth would be an obvious one. No one older than Biden is going to be challenging him, at least we hope. And yeah, so at least it would be a different dynamic than these two elderly men, somewhat addled, going after each other. Okay, we've gone a bit over an hour. Maybe we should wrap it there. So Matt, thanks for doing this special crossover episode and talking to me about this. I don't know if we solved any of the issues, but I think we at least laid out some of the dynamics. That's
step one.
Yes, you have to formulate the problem. Okay, so people can follow you on the DMZ with our friend Bill Scher also, and where else can people find your content?
Yeah, so follow me on Twitter at Matt K. Lewis. Read my columns at the Daily Beast. I write usually 3 a week. And I've also, I have a podcast called Matt Lewis and the News, and I've started simulcasting a lot of my interviews in video as well on YouTube. So, for example, I mentioned George Will. You could watch the hour-long interview with me talking to George Will. We got into a big argument over denim. He hates blue jeans, and he's very passionate about this. Okay. We got into a big argument over it. He actually I think he would argue that's part of our spiritual problem has to do with denim.
That's going back a ways. You've really had some big guests on your show in the past couple of months.
Yeah, we've had Glenn Greenwald has been on, George Will, Stephen Hayes, David French, David Frum, Bill Kristol, just a ton of really interesting people, So, and if you go to youtube.com/Matt Lewis, you will find that.
Okay, and we will include links to that below on Bloggays, and so this show, Culturally Determined, is now on its own channel as well. And so subscribe to this channel, which you can also just go to youtube.com/culturally determined and get to it there. And you can also, subscribe using your podcast app, etc. Twitter, RKCW. Okay, that's by the end of the show, it's always like self-promotion time, and I'm like exhausted from the conversation, and then it's like pushing the one extra just across the finish line to do all that self-promotion stuff. Okay, so thank you again, Matt, for taking the time. We've both been blogging heads people for a long time, so it was nice to finally talk to you in front of the camera, and I hope people enjoyed it. So thank you, and thanks to our viewers and listeners, and we'll see you again next time.